Look, thank you so much for coming. Look, at first, nothing came to mind when I received the invitation to give a lecture in this series. The topic was significant Australian art in relation to the Drill Hall collection. And I wasn't at all sure I could make a distinctive contribution. And then I remembered seeing a particular work by Neil Roberts. And I thought, look, I can say things about this work that nobody else can say. And so maybe I should talk about it. I know it really well. For most of the 7 years that I was the head of the School of Art, this work hung out right next to the front door of my office in the School of Art, where I'd had it put. So it's an old friend. And in a sense, this lecture is a meeting of four old friends: the work itself, the maker, Neil, the subject, David, and the beholder, me. So, wondering if it was a viable idea, I just Googled Neil Roberts' bounce drawings, and it came up with Monash University Art Museum collection, where they have a number of his bounce drawings. And I read this really engaging and interesting short piece, several hundred words, maybe 700 or 800 words, offering a synopsis of Neil's practice and the bounce drawings in the particular. I thought, this is interesting. And I came to the end of it, and it had been written by Deborah Clark. So I thought, this is a good omen. So the people who laughed know that Deborah Clark and I have been life partners for 43 years, so that was good. So the work is a memorial. It has a date in the title, and the date is 1 year after David Watts' death. Now, David died by his own hand. He suicided in 1998. I am going to talk about the manner of his death a little bit later, as I will talk about the manner of Neil's death. And so I'm obliged to give you a warning that if the lecture raises issues for you, help is available from Lifeline, Beyond Blue, and other sources. At the time of his death, David was the head of the sculpture workshop at the ANU School of Art. He was a distinguished mid-career artist with a national reputation. His death was a huge loss for our community. Bitlada, you just don't hesitate, tell me, because I can just, incredible loss for our community. He was such a dynamic, charismatic teacher. It was devastating, and it was devastating nationally. He had, he was a Scottish migrant. He'd been born in Paisley in Scotland in 1952, and his family had emigrated to Adelaide in 1966. And then he'd done a BFA at the South Australian School of Art, and then a master's, I think in 1984, at the Tasmanian School of Art. And then he went to work at what was then now known as Oates, and is now the West Australian Institute of Technology, and is now known still more is now known as the stand next to you so you can keep doing it. Now known as I can't remember. I've just forgotten. Curtin University. Thank you very much. So we were robbed, and people in Perth, people in Adelaide, people in Hobart, people in New Zealand, people all over the country were completely devastated. And look, you'd think that might be enough weight for one work of art to carry, but no. Only 3 years later, not even quite, Neil Roberts died. Suddenly, shockingly, he was hit by a train while he was walking his dog in the morning. The train shouldn't have been there. He did it every day. He walked his dog there every day. And it just happened again. I mean, Neil was known across Australia, and he was exactly a distinguished mid-career artist. They were both running towards becoming really major Australian artists when they died. We were robbed again. They were friends of each other and they were friends of mine. I'm still rattled by the loss of them. Neil was also incredibly influential. He just made friends. People just loved him and were close to him as a human being, but also as an artist. And as I've been writing this lecture, I'm thinking, oh God, this could be 6 lectures. But the last 2 would be artists who have been influenced by Watt and Roberts, who are still practicing today, all these years later. And you could easily fill it. I can see people in this room for whom that is true. I'm loath to name them, but because I'll miss somebody. But because there are scores and scores and scores of them. So what I'm going to do is going to be slightly informal. That is to say, not rigorously art historical accounts of the artists, but about my relationship with them. Very much aware that other people knew them for longer and had deeper and closer relationships than I did, but mine were deep too, and they were close. I realise I've skipped over the brief bio for Neil. I did David's on my way through. Neil came from suburban Melbourne. He had, let's call it a little wandering wild youth. He began to study glass making. His father actually had as part of his career, a career as an industrial glass maker, so his dad was really delighted that he was studying glass. Not always the case. He studied, I believe, at, in one text I've read the Jam Factory, but he certainly studied at the Orifice School in Sweden. Both. I think that was true. I thought that was true. Thank you. And he was lured to Canberra in the first instance to teach in the glass workshop at the Canberra School of Art in 1983. Now, the glass workshop at the Canberra School of Art was opened in 1983 by Klaus Moyer. So I think that he was part of the opening staff of the glass workshop. He taught there. And then as he developed, he shifted from what Barbara Campbell has described as working glass, from working glass to working with glass. So he changed his kind of attitude to materiality. And he worked with glass, collected objects, neon, made prints with obscure printing technologies, drawings, public art commissions. He came to Canberra in 1983. He settled at a former factory in Queanbeyan with his then partner, Exeter Medici, where they had a home, a studio and a gallery called Constantinople. Now, if all he'd ever did was operate Gallery Constantinople, it would have been a huge contribution to art in this town. So that's really not to be underestimated. All right, let's have a look at this. It's a bounce drawing. The bounce drawings are made with balls. They're sporting balls of various kinds. I'm only going to look at this one. He uses boot polish and he uses Stonehenge paper, which is very, very robust, rag paper that can take a lot of punishment. So 2,000 bounces for David Watt. Still getting me? A bit more. This one's made with a soccer ball. You can see it in the patterning, in the lighter areas at the top and the bottom of the composition. This bounce drawing is really different from all of the others that I've seen. I don't have a comparison, but they often have, they're like misty, sort of misty, smoky, abstract spaces, usually in dark colours, although I have seen a pink one. So I think it's distinctive in the patterning, and it's certainly distinctive in the word. So he's masked the word knowledge, and the word knowledge refers to a series of works by David Watt. So it has this quite extraordinary thing. I have a couple of things. How big is it? About that big, not enormous. It has quite an incredible luminosity, especially through the lettering, but also through the upper and lower framing edges. I'm looking a bit now at the patterning. So a soccer ball is not a sphere. The standard soccer ball is not a sphere. What it is a truncated icosahedron. I mean, you've all been watching the World Cup, you all know that, so. And so it's the patches of leather, which there are 12 pentagons and 20 hexagons, and none of the pentagons touch. They're usually the black part of the pattern on the soccer ball, and the white hexagons form it. And so I think that there's something really about that geometry that would have really attracted Neil, something he could never know. And this is because we have Wikipedia, that you can find these things, which, I mean, believe it or not, I looked up truncated icosahedron and I found this little drawing by Piero della Francesca. made in the late 15th century. I've seen 3 different dates, like 1460, 1480, 1495. It's in a book that describes, it's called the Little Book of the Regular Solids, the 5 regular solids. So Della Francesca has got a drawing of a soccer ball in his mathematical treatise. I just love that so much, and I know there are people in the audience who love Piero della Francesca, so this is for you. This then gives you the general sense. Neil said that the bounce drawings were different from his other work. They were different because they involved pictorial conventions of composition, tone, and so on. Whereas his found object works, collected object works, he didn't like calling them found objects, have a different kind of materiality and address to the spectator, which is not in fact pictorial. What they share is a sense of energy and energy exchange. I've lost it. There it is. So a different sense of, they share a sense of energy and energy exchange between the object, the ball, and bouncing down on the paper. So the body and the ball, from the ball to the paper, bouncing back up and down repeatedly. So it's about an energy exchange between the surface and the artist via the sporting ball. And he also thought they were drawings that made a parallel between the energy exchange in sports and in art. So, there's something about that bouncing, that kicking, that head-butting, all of that goes on in a soccer game that is somehow has an analogue in a drawing like this. Sorry about that. I thought I might crack up a bit. And finally, he spoke very beautifully in a piece of writing called Rewiring the Plait, the Tat and Baudelaire's Robe, quite late on in the piece, I think it's in there anyway, about the bounce drawings. And he said, and so I decided to bruise paper by repeated striking. So this inky cloud, boot polishy cloud, is actually a bruise. He's thinking of it as a bruise. The paper is bruised by the action of repeated striking. And that, I think, gives it a real sense of the power of the work as a memorial for his dead friend. Well, it's just as well I said I was going to speak a lot about this, because now I'm going to have to fly through the rest of my slides. It's the segue now is to these collected objects, which are his best-known works. They're very simple. They use often very simple combinations, pairings, very simple joinings, in a way that is very, look, it's very deceptively simple because they're deeply thought through objects. I've used this one first, A Bullet and Breath, because of speaking in the end about the bruise in the Bounce drawing, so that it serves as a reminder. And again, this is from Barbara Campbell in her essay for the work she did at the exhibition she did at the Glassworks in 2017 called Chances with Glass, which is in many ways about the kind of a sense of implicit violence in Neil's work. Now, this is not a sense of a kind of violence that's going to erupt, but because Neil's key theme was masculinity and its frailties, that he, part of the frailty of the masculine is the possibility of violence. He wrote about violence in the streets, for example, and so this bullet with a little vial of air is like the breath from the body and the weapon with its potential for gross violence. The breath of air is also a reminder of Marcel Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp is constantly haunting his work. It shows up again and again, and it's carried by the glass. This website, neilroberts.com, is an amazing resource. It was built by Barbara Campbell and Merrin Gates initially, and it's been recently refurbished. It's got tons of writing on it, and it's got a catalogue raisonné which currently has something over 700 images on it. So I recommend that as an absolute key source. There's a great little photograph of a very young Neil in his studio with his collected objects. And this is a marker of when I first met Neil. I first met Neil in 1987 when I happened to be in Canberra, and I was a sessional lecturer in the Art History and Theory department at the Canberra School of Art. I'd come to Canberra because Deborah Clark was here, and at that time I was tutoring at the Fine Arts Department at the University of Sydney in 1985 when she came. And then in 1985 I had this stunning fellowship to the Prints and Drawings Museum at the British Museum for 6 months. And when I came back, I agreed that I wouldn't go back to tutoring. I'd come to Canberra and live in her house, write my master's, because she got the same damn fellowship for 1986 and was going to be away. So I looked, what? Enough. No, that's good. And so I told you it was going to be about me too. So look, I was contacted by Exeter Medici and I was kind of interviewed. And they were looking for somebody to write a catalogue essay. I hadn't had anything to do with the show. She gave me a brief. She talked about the work. I wrote a draft. Then I met the artists, and they looked at the essay. They thought the essay was okay. It's published in the catalogue. So by a little kind of miracle, I wrote the essay for the very first exhibition at the Canberra Contemporary Arts Space in 1987. After, it was called Site-Specific City. And then after that, Deborah and I went to Sydney, then when we went to Perth. Now, it's important. So this is a combined work by X and Neil, and as you can see, it involves an illusion, and it's a performance piece involving shadows in one of the underpasses near Civic. Look, I don't think that particular underpass exists anymore. I think it might have gone in the light rail, but I can't remember. I used to remember where it was. So the performance and photography piece. So I was in Perth and I met up with Neil again, and that's when I met David and Steph and Stephanie Jones, who was to become his wife. And I met them at an event called ARCS, Australian Regional Artists Exchange. Australian Regional Artists Exchange. An extraordinary international exchange with Southeast Asian artists and artists in Perth. This was ARCS 2, called Metromania, in 1987. The first one was 1985. So years before the APT, and run by artists and funded by the state government largely, I think. So it was a terrific event. David Watt was the chair of ARCS, and Neil was coming back for his second participation. This is a work called Tenderly Gently. None of the bloody documentation from this period is any good at all because people didn't think of it much. They didn't take photographs. They didn't take photographs of openings. They didn't take photographs of installs. It's unbelievable. It's like it's unthinkable in today's world. Can I tell your story, AB? Do you mind if I tell your little story about no photos? Look, I'll surprise you and I'll do it anyway. I spoke to Anne about it, and she said, look, after Neil died, I realised I didn't have a single photograph of him. I'd been his friend, close friend, for decades. You know, we just didn't do it. Anyway, so it's a neon piece, and there are two little pieces, two words, tenderly and gently. This is the tower of the Perth Institute of Contemporary Arts, which had just been open. And the reason he'd install them in the tower was he wanted them to be in relation to Bond Tower. You might remember the incredibly successful genius businessman that worked his magic in Perth in the 1980s. What a time it was. But it was in 3 locations, so you get a better view. Here's a daytime shot. And this is, this location is the former children's courts at the, just in North Perth. And it happens to be right next to the Art Gallery of Western Australia, and they adopted it as an annex. And the first thing that went in was this little install, not just nails, but there were several rooms with art that were installed. And I'd met up with him there at the opening, and we were looking around. He was unhappy with the way it was on the shelf, and he was chatting to me, and then suddenly our relationship to the room changes, and we wait, and then everyone has gone out of the room, and the second we're alone, up goes the sash window, and he kind of dives out head first through the sash window, and my job is to hold him by the ankles so he doesn't fall onto the pavement below. So he was a risk taker. He was a risk taker. But it was a little bit frightening, but it was a little bit irritating. And I know artists are always right, but he was dangling there and he was going tap, 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 like 1 centimetre, tap, 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 5 mils, He was a big guy. He was dense, he was heavy. And then I had to pull him in again. So we got through that and we stayed friends. This photograph makes it look much closer than it is. It's looking up really close. It's looking up at an acute angle. He was actually swaying above that shelf. It was, as you can tell, a memorable thing. The final install space was the Commonwealth Bank. I'm going to hand this around. I do want it back. It's a work of art. Yeah, I know. And so he made these works of art. This is the Commonwealth Bank in the city, the CBD in Perth. And he stamped, the deal was if you gave him a $20 note, he'd stamp it with tenderly gently on one side and trust me on the other. And the idea was that you then put it into circulation. The concept was, how do I get, like 100 $20 note into circulation without spending the $2,000. So he was very, very resourceful. So I failed. I kept mine. The note itself is amazing. I promised a little bit of social history. That's Neil with me and David McNeil at a pop-up exhibition in 1993. That's Neil's work in the show. He worked very much with tools that bore the signs of labour and aware of labour and masculine, particularly masculine labour, and again were analogues in the way that they were worn for the wearing out of the bodies of the men who used the tools. He used sporting equipment, as I've spoken of, and again, very, very simple means. The tools he just collected and he just hung like that. Then the footballs, he would just very carefully and gently unpick, and then he's popped it into this wooden frame to transfer the football into a flower, to turn it into another kind of object. It's called auspicious symbol. Or these trowels. This is called strozimomancy. And strozimomancy means divination by stroking or spreading. Now, I've spoken to him about this work because my father was a bricklayer and I understood about trowels, and I'd worked on the building sites with my dad and all of this kind of thing. And my dad was a magic bricklayer. He could pick up the mortar, he'd stroke it, he'd flick it up by the brick, he'd lay the next brick. So it was like a magic. And he speaks about it in, again, this piece, Rewiring the Plat de Baudelaire's Robe. And he speaks about, what's this, a conversation? He, just starting with the formal elements, I think, look, in the article, excuse me, wait a second, I just lost my train of thought. This article is an incredible effort by an artist to describe how you try to tickle that moment of alchemy out of inert objects to make a work of art. I'd recommend anybody read it. It's really fabulous. It's really fabulous. I know. It's a really fabulous article. He goes through three different kinds of relationships to objects. He goes through how this thing of how you can possibly find these little magical moments. So when I saw divination, I was thinking, oh, this is interesting. That's mystical. Well, I went through the works in the catalogue Raisonnée. There are 4 more divination pieces, all with different kinds of, divination by channeling, divination by means of invisibility or being alone, divination by dreams, divination, the divination by summoning the souls of the deceased, divination by means of water, divination by means of the dead. I mean, he had this other thing that I have never noticed before. Anyway, there's something for somebody later on. This one is the, what's it called? Alaxomancy. This is divination by channeling. And again, the simplicity of the joining of the objects. Nola Farman has written on this really beautifully. She relates it to arte povera, both in method of collecting objects for the purpose and in using the simplest means of joining elements to make complex objects. I know I'm running late. He did lots of public artwork. You can see that still today. This is another public artwork using neons. That's the same work on a dining room table. This is a late work using worn-out gloves, which are so worn out that he began to photograph them, which was a new process for him, because otherwise they'd rot and lost. This is a shitty little photograph because I couldn't find one of the boxing works. So the lead light forms that describe the space between 2 boxes where Barbara's standing. It was a photograph in the Canberra Times, and I was just hoping it was going to be a little stronger. So Neil really felt that his work arriving at boxing was inevitable. And again, this space between, like the ball and the paper, is an energetic space, a charged space, a space charged with potential action, potential violence, potential bruising. Well, this work is a wonderful piece now in the National Gallery collection. And I've just got a little anecdote that I must tell about it. My timekeeper's telling me I'm like 10 minutes over time already. So clearly it's an old boxing gym punching bag which has been layered with a kind of Art Deco patterning of leaves and a text at the bottom, which is half ether, half dew mixed with sweat. And again, it's a pairing of two things, the fragile glass and the heavy, worn punching bag. He speaks about why he uses lead light in the flat wall pieces as well as in pieces like this. The first thing he says, he uses it because of its association with the transfer of energetic light into churches, being the light of the love of the light of God. You know, so he's again. There's much more mystery in these works than I had thought of before, and I think it's just because I'm older and wiser. My anecdote is that let me see. About 10 years ago, I was teaching a first-year class in the National Gallery, and this work was hanging in a long gallery, maybe about as far away as the back wall of the theatre here, although flat, of course. And I'm chatting to the classes, and then I hear it, and I look up, and something just happened to me. It was like I don't sprint. I was sprinting, and I don't shout. I was screaming at the top of my voice. There were 3 young men, and one of them was thumping this work. And I don't mean giving it a bit of a poke. I mean pummeling. I screaming, stop! I could not believe it. And a security guard came running too. You might remember Lenny, the lovely old security guard. He said, I heard you. Anyway, so Neil died in that shocking way that I described before. You know, I heard of his death as a rumour. I was at an opening at Beaver Gallery, and I tried to call Neil. I just didn't believe it. No one had heard anything, and I drove down there with my son Fraser, and there were a group of women with Barbara in that room. Anne Brennan was there, Alex was there, Anne Brennan was there, Alex Sloan was there, Kirsten Farrell opened the door to the studio, and she just looks at me, and I just say, is it true? So they let me in. But we didn't stay for long. But I did get to ask the question, is there anything I can do? And there was an answer, and it was a good answer. Can you call Exeter Medici? Do you have her phone number? Yes, I have her phone number. Still have her phone number. And so I went home and I called X. And I'm so glad of having the opportunity to have made that phone call. And she's told me so is she. So there you go. Don't forget that. So I am running a little late. This is David Watton. It's It's an opening at the now-defunct Nolan Gallery early in the 1990s. He, with a couple of his works from the Knowledge series, an anatomical example, and Julius Caesar. Oh, Anne, I found the photo. That's Neil's work in that exhibition. I think it's a different work. I think the decor work hung closer to the ground. The tools were longer. And just because we can have a measure, see how big Neil is, see how big David is, that's at David and Steph's wedding. I don't want to know about the cactus. It must be an Adelaide thing. Is it still alive? Fantastic. The best website for David's work is this one at Gallery Dusseldorf is Dealer in Perth. And that's David and I at work. We work together. Photographed by David Williams. And for me, you can see it's a kind of first day of school. It's 1985 and we're at the annual planning retreat when the School of Art actually had money, and we're at Bateman's Bay. And so I'm like bursting out of my skin. I'm actually only acting head of art theory then. It was advertised and I was appointed in September of that year. But David is kind of buzzing with energy too. He was the most energetic person I ever met. He used to vibrate like an electric toothbrush, you know, like this, like this. He was so incredibly intense, and we are clearly pleased with ourselves. I think we even went home happy, but you know, thanks, David. I said that I'd met David in ARC's 89. That's right. But the first work of his that really struck me was this. It's called The Classroom. David's practice is made up of drawing, performance, and object making. And he was an incredible draftsperson. His working method, as in many things in his life, was intemperate. It was like, let's plan something that's at the absolute limit of my capacity. So this is in Pica. This is a 19th century classroom. It's a huge room. And what he, assisted by Stephanie Jones, using these pencils, what they've done is produce this trompe-l'oeil drawing that kind of expands the space into this other virtual space. It was like shocking to see, because it was like, you did that? You really spent this a week, Steph? About a week? Like day and night? I can't believe it. And the elements you see in there come from one of his typical sources, which was popular mechanics. He worked with comedy. He worked with amateur sources. He worked with childhood sources. Popular mechanics was 1950s, 60s especially, is imagining a future world that, of course, we realise when we look at the images never really arrived. It's there are projectors. That's a side wall. That was the best picture I could get. Ooh, too fast. His performance practice is not very well documented. Now, I've said he worked with comedy, and he worked with popular, kind of low comedy. It's not quite right, but it'll have to do for now. So, you know, English comedians like Morecambe and Wise, or let me see, Laurel and Hardy, or Jacques Tati, and especially Monsieur Hulot, especially Mon Oncle. So he had televisual, cinematic, magazine sources that he used either directly as to copy, and sometimes at a kind of second degree as inspiration. And so here is some documentation of perhaps his best known performance called Was That the Human Thing to Do? Now, he worked always, and I think exclusively, with a performance partner called Steve Wigg. So they were known as Watt and Wigg. And they produced scores and scores of performances. I have seen one reference that thinks that there are over 150, you know, I mean, really a lot. And in a way that's shared to a degree with Neil Roberts' interest in the frailty of humanity. David Watt is also interested in the frailty of, look, I just said humanity, I meant masculinity. So my sincere apologies to the women in the room. What would that look like? Well, it looks like this. It looks like an excess of the model for mankind, the mannequin, the suit, the pipe that proliferates to become the hyper masculine. But we're not talking about Odysseus here. We're talking about the suburban man who might be interested in popular mechanics and be a little amateur maker, or have a little train set that he would use at home, this kind of man. So the title of the work that we began with, Knowledge, comes from this magazine. David had a lot of them. He had them as a child. He was a very sickly child. He was lucky to survive to adulthood. He only had one lung. He wasn't, despite his amazing energy, he seemed robust. Perhaps he wasn't as robust as he appeared. So it's a kid's encyclopedia. There's the cover. You get the idea from the classical to the contemporary. And then wonderful things like this. And these were the kind of things that he was drawn to. This is a work in the National Gallery. I'm so sorry that it's such a crappy quality. That you get the idea. There's small objects here that are made with MDF, cut and carved MDF, painted with acrylic paints. Here's a better image. Headgear through the ages. each piece is about 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres. So this kind of absurd proliferation, not too different from the proliferation of, say, tools in Neil's work. Here's a work called The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Van of 1993. And it's a really lovely piece. It doesn't come from knowledge. He didn't exclusively use knowledge. I think the figure of the running boy is from... Yeah. So the figure of the running boy is from knowledge. It's an image of muscles in the leg. But the trucks come... Oh, look, he gave it to me. It's supposed to be a floor piece. And the first piece he gave me the whole thing, but he just gave me that one. And I managed to hang it on the wall, not happy. So it came up with this way of at least putting them into three-dimensional space by screwing them down onto wooden panels that fitted those IKEA bookshelves, and that's part of our study. That's the source for the trucks, the Ladybird Book of Commercial Vehicles, which I recommend to anyone. It's fabulous. This is my last example for David, assisted by Ham Darrow, for the exhibition Archives in the Everyday, curated by Trevor Smith in 1997. The work is called Inhabiting the Archive. So a whole bunch of artists were invited to work with archival materials. Project manager for this exhibition was Neil Roberts. You were in the show, and Brennan, who's everywhere, and Fraser was in the show. Yes, he was. That's right. Anne's my oldest colleague, and I like to tease her a tiny little bit whenever possible. So it's not super clear because, again, it really is an excessive ambition. I think it worked. There are 5 panels with houses on them, and this set of steps in front of the National Library. Each artist got a different institution, and David's was the National Library, Anne's was the Australian War Memorial. His initial plan was to fill all 3 sets of risers in these steps with shoes, which is what you can't quite see. There you get the idea. So it's... Pardon? Oh, yes, please do. Thanks. That's Hamdara, who... I'm sorry, just... Oh, right. And the shoes came from a catalogue of shoes that was held in the National Library. The buildings came from promotional housing developments in Canberra in the post-war period. So you get the idea. The close-up of the houses. Look, these things are actually enormous. They're enormous. It's just the National Library of Australia is so gigantic. It takes 2 strong people to carry that damn thing. It's about that high, wider than I can stretch. I forgot to say, that yellow van is David's van. Okay. So here's a photograph of, I think, another birthday. because you might be able to see sitting in front of David is a birthday cake. And next to him is Steph Jones, and on the other side is me and Deborah Clark and Stephen Holland. Isn't that a fabulous photograph of a young Stephen Holland? And I'm using it now and there because I want to talk about his death. I could just stop. Do people have to go, or can they stay for another 5? You're okay? You think I'm okay? All right. I'm not going to say anything gruesome. I'm just going to tell you that, I first heard about his death when the police called me late in the afternoon in my office at the School of Art and asked me if I'd be willing to go with Stephanie Jones and identify the body. So I did. And then we rushed back to her place, and we had to do a little bit of running around because it was his birthday. And there was a party planned. And the party was at Neil's place. So all of these things. And so we got our act together. And then in shifts, Neil and May and Steph, I guess, I think Kirsten Farrell again. We stood inside the front door. You came through that front door, the same front door that Kirsten Farrell had opened to me, would open to me 3 years later, and stepped into what was Gallery Constantinople. And then there were a couple of other rooms on the left, and then you stepped into the studio. So we stood there, and people were arriving in ones, twos, little groups of 3 or 4. Great, it's going to be a party, carrying presents, wrapped with bows. And they walk through the door, and one after the other, we poleaxe them. You know, I'm sorry to say he's done this thing. So I needed to tell you that because it was a kind of deliberate, so deliberate. His actual death was not very violent. He gassed himself in his car. He attached, in a way that only David Watt could do, an old vacuum cleaner hose to the exhaust pipe and put it in the back window. And then he sat in the driver's seat, wearing his performance suit. Okay. I ask you, was that the human thing to do? Was it? I'm trying to find a word to describe how I felt about that. And after many, many alternatives, I've come up with ticked off. Anyway, I've forgiven him because I've forgiven him when I haven't. I've forgiven him because when you're in a state of depression, you don't really know what you're doing. And I haven't forgiven him because when you're in a state of depression, if you can just hang on, you can get better. Okay. This is completely gratuitous. I want to thank the friends of the Drill Hall Gallery, and I found this photograph of Liz and Kim Chapman. Kim Chapman, the president of the Friends of the Drill Hall Gallery, with Deborah Clark in 1999, and you'll recognise the venue. It's the Garden of Mary and Mary Eagle and Martin Gascoigne and Hetty Gascoigne in fact, at Rosalie's wake, indeed. So another regret. Well, Thank you for listening. I'm really happy to have been invited. I've only run until 8 minutes past 3. 8 minutes past 3. So thank you. Sorry it's been sad.